September 23, 1983 started out as a night like any other, but sometime after 10 p.m., things quickly devolved.
When police arrived about 10:30 last night, they found an empty cash drawer, an open back door, no employees, and blood all over the restaurant's kitchen. Early this morning...
This crime takes place in the small town of Kilgore, a town located in northeast Texas, closer to Louisiana than to Dallas, and at the time home to just 11,000 people. Now, more than 40 years later, the population has only increased to 13,000. Oil was and is a huge part of Kilgore's economy as it's located in the incredibly oil-rich East Texas oil field, which Kilgore was once the economic center of. But this crime didn't take place in an oil field, at least not completely. Nearby towns and cities like Longview and Tyler are crucial parts of the metro area, with people traveling in between the communities all the time. Like anywhere else, people in Kilgore lived, worked, and dined day in and day out, and like any other town, friends and family were vital. For example, if you needed a ride home from work, you could hitch a ride with a friend, and if you needed help robbing a store, you could ask your cousin. Star Spagano and her boyfriend were hungry that night, so they went to the local KFC to get a quick bite to eat. As they were walking through the parking lot towards the entrance, Star noticed a white van parked in the back near the dumpsters. She thought it was weird as there wasn't a parking space in that area, but she didn't think too much about it. She just went inside with her boyfriend and got in line. By now, it was after 9 p.m. There were a few other people in the restaurant when Star entered, including several employees and some guests. The workers included Opie Hughes, age 39, who had moved to Kilgore from Breckenridge, Texas, 11 years prior. Joseph Johnson, a 20-year-old student who was taking classes at the local community college and working 2 jobs. A teenage girl named Ashley, and Mary Tyler, age 37, who was originally from Sabine Parish, Louisiana. Mary's daughter Kim also worked at the KFC, but she and Ashley left the restaurant before the carnage unfolded, with Ashley specifically leaving about 20 minutes before closing time. This left just 3 workers behind the counter. Shortly after Star got in line, 3 African American men entered the restaurant and got in line right behind her, ostensibly there to pick up food. As Star noted, one was taller than the other. When she went up to order, Star could hear the conversation Mary was having on the phone with her daughter right in front of her. The two were discussing how much money was left in the register. Apparently, it was over $2,000, an unusually high amount, especially for the 80s. Adjusted for inflation, it would be over $6,500 today, which is more than a month's worth of pay for most people. Star's boyfriend ordered first, ordering a 9-piece full dinner, and then Star ordered a 2-piece meal with potatoes and coleslaw. The couple ordered their food at 9:47 p.m., and after them, one of the 2 men behind Star ordered as well. He apparently ordered a 2-piece snack, all white, as that's the last meal printed on the receipt tape at 9:57 p.m. After they ordered, Star and her boyfriend sat down to eat inside the restaurant and left around closing time. As she was leaving, Star noticed the white van in the parking lot hadn't moved. Shortly after closing time, several people entered the restaurant, including Joey's friends David Maxwell and Monty Landers, ages 20 and 19, who were there to pick him up from work. A violent struggle quickly ensued, leaving a dent in the wall, and Mary and the perpetrator's blood scattered everywhere. One of the perps left their blood on a cardboard box that was used to hold the receipt tape for the cash register, and the other left behind a bloody napkin. After the struggle, the 2 men kidnapped the employees and their friends, 5 people in total, and loaded them into the van parked outside. They ransacked the building and drove off sometime after 10 or 10:30 p.m. As they were leaving, they nearly ran into another driver who said he saw several people in KFC uniforms hollering and screaming. However, the witness said he didn't see any African Americans and that the driver of the van was white. Once they were in the van, the thieves drove the employees to a nearby oil field about 14 miles away in Rusk County. It was a wide open rural area where nobody could see them, especially at night. In other words, it was the perfect place for horrendous crimes. At 10:57 p.m., the driver pulled into the driveway of a woman named Marsha Williams right next to the oil field, with nothing but his parking lights turned on the van. He didn't do anything at first, but a few minutes later he pulled off, and around 10 minutes after that, Marsha heard gunshots. She said she heard 5 gunshots in total, an initial 4 in quick succession, then a pause before a final gunshot about 5 minutes later. At the time, Marsha didn't think anything of it because gunshots were quite common in the area. For all she knew, it could have just been someone hunting at night. While all this was going on, Mary Tyler's husband went to KFC to look for his wife, who for some reason hadn't come home. When he got there, he found the place in disarray, with blood and emptied registers telling him everything that he needed to know. He called the police and they started a search for the missing employees that very night, but with no luck. The 5 victims' bodies wouldn't be discovered until the next day. All of them had been lined up in a row, face down in the oil field, and shot in the back of the head. One victim, Opie Hughes, was spaced farther away from the others and showed signs of rape. Police analyzing the crime scene could tell that more than just 5 shots had been fired. They were certain that at least 2 different revolvers were used, since some of the bullets showed different rifling characteristics, with a possible third gun due to 7 shots having the same rifling characteristics. Since revolvers typically hold 6 shots, the police argued, 7 similar shots would mean that the shooter either reloaded or that there was another gun. That said, 7-shot revolvers do exist, so it's possible that all 7 came from one gun. Needless to say, the horrifying discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Families had their loved ones ripped right from them, and the worst part was no one had even the slightest idea who did it, and they wouldn't know for years. The hunt for the KFC murderers was not easy, and in fact it would take several decades to even begin to resolve. Along the way to solving the crime, police went through multiple suspects, but none of them seemed to pan out. You might think that the blood left at the scene should have made things easy. After all, why not just DNA test it? But DNA testing didn't exist in 1983. It was actually invented the next year in 1984, and it wasn't used in a criminal case until 1986. Even throughout the rest of the 80s and 90s, it was expensive, rare, and limited, especially since they hadn't yet built the giant DNA databases that we have today. This meant that investigators couldn't just test the blood for DNA, at least not at first. In 1995, over a decade after the massacre took place, police arrested their first suspect in connection with the case. He was Jimmy Mankins Jr., a drug dealer and the son of a local politician. Police said that his ripped fingernail had been found in one of the victims' waistbands, and that he had been bragging in the local area about having committed the murders.
He said he wasn't involved, and that's all that we can believe. We love him. He is our son.
But in the end, DNA testing proved that the fingernail wasn't his, and Mankins was free to go.
The case was apparently weaker than anyone thought. When another lab retested the nail fragment, it came up with negative results. That test indicated it did not come from Mankins. On the strength of that test, a state district court judge dropped the murder charges.
He had apparently just been lying about the murder robbery in order to get his street cred up. After Mankins, it would be another decade before police named anyone else in connection with the crime. But this time, it stuck. In 2005, police announced the first big break in the now more than 20-year-old murder mystery. Romeo Pinkerton and his cousin Darnell Hartfield were charged with 5 counts of capital murder. They were from Tyler, Texas, a city about half an hour west of Kilgore, and had actually been considered as suspects all the way back in 1983. At that time, Hartsfield passed the lie detector test and cleared himself of suspicion. It wasn't until 2001 that a former federal investigator used DNA testing on the blood from the scene and put cops back on the cousins' trail. Romeo and Darnell were both serial burglars. In fact, Romeo had been released on supervised probation just days before the murders took place, and Darnell was arrested in 1984 for a burglary that he committed just days after the massacre. At the time of the indictment, Romeo and Darnell were both in prison, with Pinkerton serving a 50-year sentence for aggravated burglary, and Darnell serving a life sentence for aggravated perjury. That perjury charge came from Darnell telling a jury in 2003 that he hadn't been to the KFC that night, a statement that was contradicted by his blood being found at the crime scene. In the end, Pinkerton pled guilty to the murders and received 5 life sentences, avoiding the death penalty. Hartfield, who was already serving life, figured that he might as well fight and took it to trial. At the trial, Star Spagano testified about Hartfield being at the KFC and identified him as the taller of the 2 black men in line behind her. The most important evidence, however, was Hartfield's DNA. Why was it on the cardboard box, especially if he claimed that he wasn't at the restaurant that night? Darnell brought up some interesting points of his own at the trial. For example, the box that had his blood on it wasn't in any crime scene photos or mentioned in any documents about the crime scene, and there was no documented chain of custody to prove its authenticity. The court allowed it as evidence because Texas Ranger Elliott, who initially investigated the scene, said that he saw it when he was walking through the restaurant and remembered the distinctive markings on it from the blood. Let's really think about that for a second. A cop said that he saw a box more than 20 years ago and could remember the distinctive markings of the blood on it. Really? Personally, I find eyewitness testimony to be potentially unreliable, especially more than 20 years after the fact, so Elliott's testimony doesn't convince me in the slightest. Beyond that, Darnell's claims of planted evidence may have merit, especially since police corruption is far from unheard of, both inside and outside of Texas. That said, Darnell never contested that the DNA was his, just that it couldn't have been at the store that night. In an interview with CBS 19, for example, Hartfield explained that during his initial interview with police in 1983, his body was examined for scars and showed none, meaning that he couldn't have bled on the box, especially not enough to produce a large stain. Of course, whether he was telling the truth about this alleged interview is anybody's guess. Another defense that Darnell tried to make is that Pinkerton is taller than him, but Spagano said that Pinkerton was the taller of the two assailants she had seen, and if there were only two assailants, this would be a good defense. However, this most likely just points to the existence of a third assailant for reasons I'll explain soon. Then there's the question of the eyewitness who said that he saw the KFC employees in the van, but that he didn't see any African Americans, only a white driver. If he was right, then the whole case falls apart. In the end, the jury found Darnell guilty and he received another 5 life sentences, adding to his already permanent stay in prison. He would eventually pass away in 2022 due to a stroke, and his cousin Romeo would have his request for parole denied in 2019 and again in 2024. Personally, I do think they probably did it, but I don't think the evidence was compelling enough to convict Darnell. Even following their convictions, however, the case wasn't fully solved. After all, there was DNA found in Opie's pants that didn't come from either of the two cousins, meaning that a third perpetrator was still out there. And this could explain Starr's suggestion that Darnell was the taller of the two men inside the restaurant. The shorter third assailant was who went inside the store with him the first time. But the existence and identity of this third criminal would be a mystery for many, many years to come, but not forever. Officials in Rusk County actually announced a third suspect very recently, in December of 2025, having used the male DNA found on Opie Hughes' body to track him down. His name was Devin Riggs, and though he lived in East Texas in his younger years, he spent the last years of his life in California, building a criminal history in both states. Just 2 months after the murders, way back in 1983, Devin tried to kill his brother Bill for reasons still unknown. The police who came to investigate found several stolen items at their home, which led to Bill confessing that he and his brother were serial burglars. In his confession, Bill mentioned several interesting details, such as a stolen .357 revolver and some stolen vans. Perhaps the same revolver and van used in the murder. In the end, we may never know what really went down that night. Police, satisfied with Devin as the third suspect, closed the case and consider it done. But questions still remain, and there may still be more to the story. Only time will tell with this decades-long mystery. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to leave a like and comment and subscribe for more great content. Thank you.